Hello everybody! Thanks for joining us for another interview with Before You Take the Lsat. Today I get to interview Audrianne. She is a 2L, she's also a 2L at Columbia Law School. And she's part of the Journal of Gender and Law, she's part of QTPOC, she's part of CLIFS, which is the Feminist Society, and she's also part of First Generation Professionals, and finally Williams Moot Court. Yes. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today. Audrianne, I know right now there's finals, so it's really nice of her to do this with us. And so let's get started. Okay. I think I'm not going to go completely chronologically in order. I think we're going to start with the LSAT, and then we'll go back to before you even went, before you even decided on law. So if you can you just tell us a little bit about how you approach studying for the LSAT?
So, I don't know if you've actually heard the story or not. So, I took the LSAT by accident, my first practice LSAT by accident. People had been telling me for years and years and years that I should take the LSAT, that I should go to law school, and I was like, no way. And I was working with a friend who was interested in taking the LSAT, who had taken it before and was going through a prep course again. And I really had nothing better to do, and I was like, hey, all right, I'll sit in and take the LSAT with you. Like, I've always been curious as to what it was. So, to be fair, it was untimed. It took me definitely way more than the 4 hours or whatnot it takes. But whenever I totaled up my score, again, untimed, I looked at the score and I was like, dang it, I'm going to law school. So that was my first introduction to the LSAT, and I think that a lot of things that had helped me with that were my time on the speech and debate team. I was teaching speech and debate to 7th graders. I'd been doing that for a year already. So there were a lot of these different pieces, this idea of like logical arguments. I was really invested in like logic puzzles growing up. My mom would do like the jumbo variety pack of puzzles, and I would always do the like logic games, and she would do the crosswords or the different other games that, so I think that there were a lot of things that going into the LSAT really gave me an advantage.
How far out were you from school, from undergrad, when you took the LSAT? Or when you just, with your friend accidentally?
Right. So I think I took the LSAT at the end of 2014.
Yeah.
I had technically graduated 2013, but I'm in class of 2011. And that's because I took a year off and I went part-time for the last 2 years. So it took me a little bit longer to graduate. So I took the practice LSAT for the first time December 2014. I had already re-signed a 1-year contract. I was teaching in Korea at the time. And so I knew I had a lot of time to study, and I wasn't interested in taking a prep course. And so what I ended up doing is I did the parts of the LSAT that were the most fun and most interesting for me. Okay. So I took the logic games, and I forgot already the question. Was this how I studied for the LSAT? How I was introduced to the LSAT? I'm just giving my whole LSAT story.
That's okay. I think people appreciate that. It's a general question about how you approach the LSAT.
Okay. Yeah. So I knew I had a long time, and I wanted to just kind of pace myself to kind of get used to some of the skills that the LSAT required. So I did a lot of untimed logic games. I thought they were so much fun. I mean, I took practice tests. I bought a bunch of practice LSATs, and I just went through the logic games. I did the Logic Games Bible and the Logic Games Bible workbook, and I worked through those. It was so fun. After work, I'd be like, okay, great, I get to do my logic game, which I think I know as an LSAT tutor, we're not supposed to teach the logic games first because you can see the largest improvement. But for me, that really worked. One, because I had so much time, and every single time I took a full practice LSAT, I would see the logic games section, and I'd be like, yes! And having that excitement of looking at the logic games and things like that made me really able to dive into the rest of the LSAT in a way that I think was really helpful. And, yeah. So
I just want to mention to the people who are watching right now, we will have time for Q&A. So I think this interview, what we're going to do is I'll be asking a lot of the questions up front. And if you have questions, you're welcome to submit them and we can answer them at the end, or you can just ask them at the end. It's up to you. But we will definitely have time for Q&A. And if it's relevant and you ask it at a time when we see it's relevant, we will for sure also incorporate it. Okay, that's super cool. So you mentioned you have a lot of time. So how much time did you have to study for the LSAT?
I studied for 1 year.
Okay.
So it was not at all full time.
Right. You were teaching in Korea.
Right, I was. So, so I did the logic games. I did something very similar with like logical fallacies. I taught logical fallacies. I found a book online that I thought was really cute. I taught it to my 7th graders. I learned more about like logical fallacies and logical reasoning, and that helped with the LSAT as well. I was actually going to sign a 3rd-year contract, an extension of my contract in Korea. I was not planning on taking the LSAT when I did, but negotiations broke through. It broke down, and I ended up studying for the LSAT for real for maybe 5 weeks. I crammed everything in 5 weeks, so everything that I hadn't done. Thankfully, I was already making my logic games on time, so that was really helpful. I had already done a lot of work for the LR section. Reading comprehension was the section that I disliked the most, and I had done the least amount of work on, and I think that at the end that was still what I was struggling with the most, but I didn't get my score back because I took it in Korea, so I don't know what my score breakdown was, but that's where I spent most of the 5 weeks, was just working on reading comprehension.
Really? Mm-hmm. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, so it was purely self-studying then, you didn't do any courses?
I did not.
Okay, and I'm sure you're happy with that. In the end, ultimately, you're happy with that. Did your friend end up going to law school?
No, she did not.
It's funny how things work out.
Yeah, one of the things that I do recommend, and one thing that I did not do, was I had never taken a practice test in a practice center. So I had been buying a bunch of practice LSATs from like a Korean print shop, and they were stapled in the corner. And so I thought all of my practice exams were like me taking, the page or whatnot, and flipping it, and something small like that really threw me off whenever I found out that LSAT was like this,
a booklet.
Yeah. And so I don't know how much that impacted my score. My score was definitely several points lower than my last 12 practice tests that I took at home. And I think a lot of it was just not being familiar with the testing environment and all of its nuances.
I think if anybody's watched the first video I've ever done, we talk about that, trying to keep your testing conditions as similar to the day of the test and figuring what that is in the first place.
Right, yeah. I mean, I know there's a bunch of, Princeton and Kaplan or wherever all the LSAT testing centers are, or prep places will allow you to take a practice LSAT. I think most of them do it for free, at least one practice
Yeah, I
LSAT.
think so.
So that would be helpful.
Okay, cool. So how did you approach the law school admissions process or application process?
So again, I had taken the LSAT super late, and I was not intending to come back to America, and everything was super rushed. So I took the December LSAT, and I ended up taking the December LSAT, and then I waited for my scores to come in before I started applying. And I did that just because I wanted to know my range. I wanted to know.
You wanted to have a better idea of where you should be applying in the first place.
Right, and my score was high enough that I got a bunch of fee waivers for a lot of different schools, which was super helpful. So if you've already talked about that.
Fee waivers? No, not really.
Okay, so the fee waivers waive the school's portion of the fee, which tends to be anywhere from $70 to $100 usually. You still have to pay the LSAC fee of $35 an application, but I mean still I saved probably close to $1,000 on applications for sure. So that was super helpful.
Was it also for top schools?
So no. Well, yes and no.
Mm-hmm.
The top 5, Harvard, Yale, Columbia, Chicago, which I actually didn't apply to, but they didn't give me a fee waiver anyways, and Stanford, all of those schools, you had to pay the full fee. There were a couple of California schools I also had to pay the fee for, but almost everywhere else was waived. And there were a couple of schools that did not automatically give me a fee waiver that I just had to email and be like, hey, I want a fee waiver.
Wow, and they did. So I think that's something good to know is if you email, they might, if you're in their score range.
And I think it was something where the couple of schools that I had to do that for, it was some kind of clerical error or whatnot. It was not even an issue. They just gave it to me. So that was super helpful. And then I was lucky because I had somebody who's really good at writing personal statements, who had done the law school application process before me, and that was really, really critical, I think, to my success, because I wrote several drafts of a personal statement. He looked at them and he was like, nope, this is trash. Nope, that's not great.
Was it a friend, you're saying?
It was a friend. It was
Oh,
a friend.
okay.
And I think that I've had friends who try to keep their personal statements really close to their heart, and like they're like, no, it's something that's so personal. I don't want people to see it. And I think that hurt them in the end, pretty drastically. And I've talked to like a lot of different individuals who are applying to law school, who like even just told me the general gist of some of the ideas they were playing with. Like a friend of mine actually just got into Columbia, and based off of a personal essay that was totally different than her original plan, but because she was talking to me about her different options, I was like, no, this like is great, but doesn't sound very cool. Like this over here, which she totally dismissed as being too, I don't even know why she had dismissed it, but it was really dynamic and it was interesting. It was something that she could really create this whole narrative around. Ended up, being like a great essay, and she got into so many different places that she really wanted to get into.
How did you decide? I mean, I know you said your friend helped you, but did he help you also decide what you're writing about?
I think it was pretty clear that I was going to write about Project Yogurt.
Okay, we'll talk about
that. That was my, I guess like on my resume and my life accomplishments, Project Yogurt is the one that really stands out. But how I would frame it, what different parts of it I would highlight, how I would link that into law school, that was a little bit more, that required a little bit more work in thinking about.
Okay. If you guys want to let us know just that you're hearing us and everything like that on the side, that would be helpful as well. I just want to make sure we're all good. Okay. So what else? Let's see what else we want to ask you. Yeah, just in general, is there anything that you would suggest that would have been useful looking back now? I think one thing that you mentioned is just like not keeping it so much to yourself, because it's interesting to hear different feedback from different people who,
Yeah, and
might
I
have
think that it's something too where like reach out to students at law school. Thankfully, I had a friend, but if you don't have a friend, if you're first generation, if you don't know anyone, find one of the top schools and find one of their affinity groups that you might align with, or just a different group that might align with your interests. So we have like first generation professionals here, we have the Feminist Society, we have Empowering Women of Color, we have Queer and Trans People of Color, we have Outlaws, we have MELSA and SALSA and LASA. Like we have so many different affinity groups like that are really designed to like mentor individuals and to help people get through law school, but also I think that can really easily apply to individuals looking to get into law school. So just totally reach out. Like most of the student organizations have some kind of contact information online, and reaching out to them and being like, hey.
Have you ever had anybody reach out to you in that way?
No, not me individually.
But they have?
I think that there's, so like first generation professionals is like doing some kind of mentoring event with the undergraduates here at Columbia.
Wow.
I think there's like a high school program mentorship
somewhere
around. I'm not involved in that. And
Sam, actually, the last person I interviewed was part of it.
Right. So I think that there are definitely like efforts from the law school.
Yeah.
I think even, I think it was something, and somebody in student services had emailed information out about like high school mentors requests. So I think that there's enough conversation about it that it wouldn't end up being weird, and people can always say no.
Okay, so going back to before you even started law school, how did you... Okay, so I mean, I guess you answered the question about how you decided on law school. It was kind of by chance.
Right. Well, to say by chance, like I have a very clear goal of what I want my career to look like, and there were two ways to get it. It was getting an MBA or getting a JT. And my math scores would have required a lot more work to get into the type of school I would have wanted to get into than the work that I had to put in for the Lsat. So that's how I decided between the two. So it wasn't like, oh, well, I guess I'm just going to go to law school for the fun of it. It did already line up with my career goals.
Okay, so you have somewhat of a unique path, or I would say very much of a unique path, in that you've started your own business before you started law school. So can you talk a little bit about that? I think it'd be interesting to hear maybe just what you did, what your greatest challenges were.
Sure. So I had a frozen yogurt shop, Project Yogurt.
Yeah.
It was a self-serve yogurt shop similar to I was about to say a local frozen yogurt company, but I think similar to like Yogurtland. I think New York has 16 Handles that is similar.
Yeah. Pinkberry?
Pinkberry is not a self-serve.
Self-serve. Okay, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that had kind of happened. It's one of those things where like I think that it was a lot of work, but it was something that I just kind of put one foot in front of the other, and it just kind of led me to a frozen yogurt shop. A yogurt shop had opened up in my hometown for the first time. It was November. It was cold in Texas, which is, a rarity. And people were lined up outside of this frozen yogurt shop. They were just like lined up out the door for like, I don't know, maybe it was a 20-minute wait. And I was like, it's Texas. People in Texas do not stand in line in the cold for cold things.
Right.
It's just not something we do. And so,
you saw that there was a need.
right. So like basic supply and demand. I was not a business major, but I understood that much. And so I ended up doing like a bunch of research. I sat in at the yogurt shop for several hours, multiple days, and like I literally tracked every single transaction that happened. That's how I came up with like my numbers for like the base business proposal.
You would sit at the yogurt shop that exists. They wouldn't say anything?
They didn't know. I was just on my computer. Like, you know what I mean? Like they couldn't see my computer. I was just like, okay. 492, 306, like,
Wow.
Yeah, so I did that. That was kind of how I got my base numbers. I visited a bunch of different yogurt shops. So I did like a bunch of different things to get this business together. I had family investors. I got a small business loan. My dad's an architect, so he came up with the
Layout?
the design.
Yeah.
And so then it opened. I was a junior in college. I was taking a full semester load, so I was taking 12 hours plus working probably 80 hours a week there at the shop. That was definitely the hardest thing I've done, which I think has been really great for giving law school some perspective. It's something where no matter how tough or how difficult law school is, I'm like, well, at least I'm not in that semester.
Right.
And so, so ultimately the yogurt shop closed down. I went to Korea for a couple of years, came back and started law school. So the yogurt shop, I think, was open for 2.5 years, but I'd been working on it for about a year before it opened. So that was 3.5 years of my life. That was definitely pretty substantive. So I don't want to,
What do you think was the biggest takeaway from that experience, just in general, and maybe also how it applies to law school? I mean, I guess one of them was the perspective that you got from it.
Right. I think it's all about people, and I think it's all about self-care. So it's something where I think one of my biggest regrets of Project Yogurt was my sisters, were so gracious enough to work for free for the 2.5 years. So they would come in and take shifts. They were in school as well. And so I just wanted a break. I was still figuring out self-care then. And so I would schedule them. I would always schedule, if it wasn't me, I would always schedule 2 people, and if it was me, I would always schedule just myself. So I would schedule them to work, and then I would like go home and I would sleep, or I would, I'd go watch TV, or I would do different things to try to come up with self-care. And I think that created a very isolating situation because I was there alone, as opposed to like if I had gone ahead and worked a few extra hours, but worked them with my sisters. I think that would have been much more rejuvenating. I would have felt a lot more connected to individuals who understood kind of what I was going through at the time. And I think like because I didn't understand self-care, I think there was like a lot of things like I didn't know how to work to my strengths, and I didn't know how to like recharge. And so in law school, I've made it a point. I think 1L it's much harder than it has been 2L to connect with people. If I study with people, I do like my little Pomodoro situation where I study for 30 minutes. I talk to my friend for anywhere between 5 and 15 minutes, if I'm being honest. It's supposed to be 5, but 5 to 15 minutes. Study for 30 more minutes. Like I find that it's something where, for me at least, in my level of like, I'm an introvert, but closer on the extrovert spectrum, that even if I get less work done, which I still think is questionable, I still think I might even get more work done, I end up being able to study for much longer. I'm able to share the experience of studying. I'm able to connect with individuals. And I think it's a much more sustainable way of doing law school than just holing up in a library alone. And that may not be true for everyone, but I think that that's definitely true for me. And making sure that I utilize every chance I can to connect with people, obviously without leaving my studies totally behind.
Right. Okay. So speaking about 1L, which activities took up most of your time besides obviously studying? Or how did that actually play out? So how much of your time was studying versus other activities?
I think it was all studying.
Really?
Because I don't think that the student activities that I was a part of as a 1L, like they're not particularly time consuming. Like as a 2L, you spend a ton of time doing student activities, student
Were you part of
organizations.
Moot Court though?
I was, but I think that counts as studying because I was on the internal team.
Okay.
So anytime I met with my partner to go over the brief, we were writing, we were working. Like I think that was studying.
Can you explain a little bit about what Moot Court is and what internal versus external is? Just I don't know if people know what.
Oh yeah, no, that's a good point. The Moot Court. So, I believe there's also like high school moot courts and college moot courts.
Right, that's true.
But
that's true.
It's a fake court case, like you're presenting in front of the judges, and so the external teams compete in national competitions, so national moot court competitions. So, for example, the Williams Moot Court is hosted in California every year. So the external team will travel to California and present in front of fake judges there, versus the internal team. We more or less do the same thing, except we just do it to former students or other moot court
So
judges,
you guys also
volunteers
compete?
here.
The internals also complete?
Yes, but it's just done here at the school locally.
That's cool. And is it is it an actual competition where people can win?
No, you can't win.
Okay. Or everybody wins.
Everybody, yeah.
That's another way to put it, right? Okay, so most of your 1L was just studying and moot court and things like that. It felt like it was also part of that. Now that you're a year removed from 1L, how can you describe 1L as an experience? Because I feel like it's this like scary thing when people think about it, like, oh my gosh, 1L. And there's all these books like 1L of a Ride and all of those things.
Right.
It's just
so you're
like,
looking for something other than just terrible. You want me to?
I mean, I think honesty is fine. It's okay
No.
if you want to say terrible, that's okay too.
I think that it's.
It's okay, just terrible.
I did not like 1L.
Yeah, okay.
I really hated 1L.
I think most people can
it
agree.
was rough. And I think in part because people were less willing, and maybe it's different because I'm a little bit of an older student, so I think that some of the straight-throughs, individuals who go straight from college to law school, have such like a commonality of experience that they're able to form study groups differently or whatnot. I'm not totally sure about that.
Yeah.
But I really found it difficult to connect with people. I'd be like, hey, like, do you want to grab coffee? And they'd be like, I have to go study. I'd be like, okay, hey, do you want to, like, go grab lunch? And they'd be like, I've got to study. So it's something where, like, literally everybody has to study, which is very different from 2L, where people kind of have to study. No, I mean, that's an exaggeration. You still have to study. But,
yeah.
And so I think that was really frustrating for me. And I've talked to other individuals who think that it was similar for them. Like they were like, hey, we kind of like knew of people. And I think that like I definitely had some friends that were closer than others. Like and everybody was nice, like nobody was mean, but it was just like really hard. It's like ships passing in the dark. Like you're there, but everybody's just so focused on studying because you don't know what finals are like, you don't know how important grades are going to be, you don't have your job yet, like all of that's really stressful. And then as a 2L, like people have their jobs, people don't care about grades as much, and people really just come out of the woodworks and be like, hey, yes, like we sat next to each other all of last year, like let's go hang out. Hey, do you want to grab coffee? Like let's go grab drinks. Like there was like so much more socializing and so much more willingness to like
Bond.
Yeah, connect. And I'm not sure if that's true for everyone, but I think that was a struggle for me. I mean, like we had dinner at your place several times that semester, but it's something where I think the frequency of what I experienced in college, which was like, I mean, people just like, you know what I mean, they crash on each other's floors or couches. Like,
right, it's a very different experience.
It's totally different. And then in law school, we're adults and we hang out every other week.
Yeah.
It's just a little different.
So I think one thing that's also unique about you is just the way that you approach things. And so one of them would just be the fact that you applied for your long-term job while you were 1L.
I did.
Yeah, so can you talk about that a little bit, because most people end up doing the on-campus interviews that happen
Right.
after we finish as a 1L, and you didn't have to participate in that because
Right.
you'd already applied and already, so.
Sure. So Akin Gump has this really unique program. It's called the Pro Bono Scholars Program, and essentially I spent 4 weeks at the firm this summer, and then 7 weeks they sponsored with a kind of stipend scholarship situation at a nonprofit of my choice. So I ended up working at IASIS, working in the detention center in Karnes, Texas. And then in order to receive half of that stipend, I agreed to sign up a second year. So this upcoming summer, I'll be working full-time at the office, doing like their normal practice work, I guess. So I'll be doing most likely transactional work in their oil and gas division, although I don't technically have to decide until a second year associate. And so I knew I wanted to do big law from the beginning, and that's something that I think is a little bit different from some of my peers. A lot of individuals want to try big law, do big law for a couple of years, pay off their debts, or do big law and then go into nonprofit work or just any other different field and big law long term. So I, as a 1L, applied to a bunch of different firms in Texas, which is where I'm going, Houston is one of the largest employers of 1Ls, so that was great. So I was definitely, being from Texas, having that connection, I definitely was, kind of starting with a foot in the door. Akin Gump's pro bono program was really great, and it was one of 3 offers that I had in Houston or in Texas, and making the choice to go for both years was definitely something that I thought about. I didn't think about it that long.
Yeah.
And I think that it's scary to make a commitment without knowing, but it's also scary to
2 years or 2 summers?
So 2 summers.
Okay.
So it was a 2-summer commitment, and then ideally, I will have a job offer at the end of the summer. But it was something where I was like, if I really am miserable, I can not come back. You're right. I'll just miss part of the stipend, and it's something where, with my future and in line, or thinking of my future. I'm sorry, I'm just so blanking right now. Thinking of my future.
Path?
The cost, the cost, the loss of the stipend was insignificant if I really hated it.
Yeah.
But the benefits to be gained if I really loved it were incredible. So not only do I get to go back for 2 summers, right, which is just a great experience to begin with. I feel like I'm going into the law firm already knowing what the law firm environment is like.
Yeah.
I've already been there. I've done that. I know. There's so much comfort and surety in that. But also, I am a part of the pro bono committee. As a summer associate and going into my first year, and second year, I'm already a part of this committee. People already view me as a leader in pro bono efforts. I was able to at the firm, and I took that really seriously. And
It's loading back up. I'm not sure what happened. Sorry about that, guys. Okay. Where were we? We were talking about Akin Gump.
Pro bono committee.
So,
Yeah.
I'm just curious, because you mentioned that you had other offers on the table as well at that point, and I'm not specifically about that. I'm just curious, how did you decide where you were going to apply? Did you talk to people about it, or did you kind of figure it out on your own?
I applied everywhere.
Okay. Wherever accepted 1Ls?
Yeah, basically. I had a spreadsheet. I pulled off all of the contact information. I forget, it's one of the resources the law school offers, but it's it's just an database of law firms, and so you can search by who hires 1Ls in
right?
Houston. No, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
NAALP, I think. Well, if anybody's curious, I'll just put it in the comments afterwards.
And so, so I applied to a bunch of places, and Akin was one of the first ones, but I didn't apply to their pro bono scholars program specifically. I had applied generically, and then I applied to the scholars program. I did most of my applications December 1st and 2nd, and I applied to the
That's
scholars.
really early, right? That's really early, because a lot of people wait.
Yes, I think that because I was trying to do firm jobs as a 1L, I
Knew that you should apply earlier on.
right, and it didn't apply everywhere. Some of the places that I applied, one of the offers that I ended up getting, actually, I didn't apply until like January 3rd, and I heard back super quickly from them. So it's something where I think it's definitely hit or miss. I sent follow-up emails. Most of the firms I didn't ever hear back from.
Really?
Right. So I think it was definitely a good thing that I cast my net pretty wide.
How many places? How many
Probably
firms? But you hadn't
probably
spoken
around 20.
But you hadn't spoken to anyone about this, because I think
No.
it's interesting. It's like it's a lot to figure out on your own.
I think so.
But
I talked to like the career service advisor just to like prep my resume and cover letter, and I think that was super helpful. I did the practice interviews. I created, you would love this, I don't know if you know this actually, so I created an more or less like a digital CD of interview questions. So interview answers should be a minute or less, unlike what I'm doing here, but in real life, interview answers should be a minute or less.
Yeah.
So I asked myself a series of questions. I found a list online of good questions that I liked, and I asked the question, and then I filled it in with a minute of empty space. And I did that. I think I just like Googled like empty sound and downloaded the MP3
I think you told me this actually.
Right. And so then I like the interviews were all an hour and a half away from my home, and so on the drive up there, I would just play this, CD, and I would, hear myself ask a question. Like, tell us of your greatest strength. Read well. And then I got it down to, I think it was like 30 seconds to a minute or whatnot, and I would get it down to that time. And if I didn't, I would just, go back and ask the question again.
Do you think that was the most helpful preparation you did for the interview process?
Yes. Yes,
Okay.
for me, because I think it just takes practice. Like I need to, practice talking about my narrative, and coming up with something that makes sense to an outsider, because there are so many pieces rolling around in my head and they all make sense to me because I lived through all of them. I see the thousands of connections, but explaining that to an interviewer is more difficult.
And where did you say you found the questions that you ended up asking you?
Probably, I think it was like I literally just Googled like interview questions, law. I think there might have been a list on Harvard or Yale's website.
Okay.
And then I also pulled like a bunch of different, because I think a lot of the interview questions are that are not specifically asked in the law firm might be useful, or might be found from another interview list, and that would also be useful. I think that it was really helpful to come up with those answers to those questions, even though they weren't asked. It really helped me frame down my narrative.
Yeah. Okay. And out of the other resources that you used, what was the most helpful? Was it helpful to go to career services?
Yes. So I'm going to give a shout out to Scott.
Okay.
He actually ended up, he's now head recruiter at Akin.
Wow.
So he's no longer at the school, sadly, but it worked out for me. He did not hire me. He came to Akin after I did.
Your interview, yeah.
Right. And so I've been working on my cover letter for over a decade. That's how long I've had this cover letter, and I've added to it and I've adapted it, and every single time I go through any kinds of job application process, I look at like what cover letter I have, and then I streamline it, I make it better, and I edit every single word choice, right? And so it's pretty difficult for me, this cover letter that I've been working on for a decade. People see it may have maybe one or two comments, but Scott had many comments.
Wow.
He was like, delete this, move this, do this, and he like redlined it, and it was so good. It was like such high quality editing, and so that was really, really
What
beneficial.
was it about it that he changed that other people hadn't noticed? Because obviously...
I think he was like synthesizing word choices and sentence choices to make it more impactful in a shorter amount of space. Because I had multiple paragraphs that I pulled from, I have like a cover letter that's more public interest oriented, a cover letter that's more business oriented from different jobs I've had in my life. And I had a couple of, basically I had one paragraph too long when I combined the different pieces, and he synthesized it all to fit on one page.
Okay. Speaking about people who've helped you along your path, do you have any mentors? And have you had any mentors?
Yeah, so I think my friend that helped me through the
Okay.
law school application process, I call him any single time, basically any time.
What was his background? Like, he had already been in grad school?
Yeah, so he was, he'd been in law school, I think he was 2L when I was applying.
Yeah.
And he did a 4-year JD MBA program, so
Nice.
he's graduating this year, so he's beating me by a year. But he was my mentor in college as well, so we're like best friends, so it's best friend mentorship. But he just has such a head for these things. Like, he was in business school, he knows how to network, he knows how to, create narratives and frame things, and he did the law school application process twice, actually.
He applied more than once for himself?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So he'd really worked with a lot of different cover letters and cover letter ideas or personal statements or whatnot. He's great at networking and working through jobs. And so, I'd be like, hey, okay, I have 3 offers on the table. What do I do? How do I navigate this? And because he knows me so well as well, he's able to give me really on-point advice.
Okay, so we have about 20 minutes, so if anybody has questions, you can submit now. There are a few things that I still want to ask you about in the meantime, because until questions come in. So what I wanted to ask you is, one of them is about the journal. If you can just speak a little bit about your experience on a journal, and then I'll get to that one.
So my journal is a little bit unique. I think that each journal can be so different, different administrative mechanisms, different expectations, different workloads, things like that. So I was on a journal that does not have a note requirement. A note is a very long paper, a very long research paper that's legal related.
The last person I interviewed, Sam, had a 30-page note.
Right. So I was like, because I know I'm going transactional as opposed to litigation, I was like, I do not want a note. A note is not going to benefit my life. I mean, it would be super cool to be published, but I don't care about that. That's not necessary for my career path. So I did not want to write a note. So this was one of the journals that it was not required. I really just did it because I was curious about the editing process.
Yeah.
I thought that would offer me valuable skills, and I was interested in the subject matter. So I got to read a lot of really cool pieces related to gender and the law. And so our note, our journal, I think, has a pretty light workload. We read submissions by authors, and then we go to a submissions meeting and we vote on them. So we'll say, hey, we liked this, we didn't like this, we had some neutral comments, we think they can be, this is something that can be fixed, and then we take a vote. Every journal member there votes.
How many people are on the journal?
No idea.
Okay.
25,
Okay.
30.
That's a lot.
It is quite a lot. Maybe less. Bad with numbers. And yeah, so there's quite a few of us. And then the articles, that once we have enough articles, they get divided to teams, and the teams are responsible for gathering sources, checking citations, and then doing basic editing work. So
Your team is editing?
Mm-hmm, content suggestions, grammar, corrections, things like that.
Okay, and then the second question that I was going to ask you is, so in law school, I feel like it can be really easy to just get consumed by everything in law school, and a lot of people do. It's I think you have to put in a lot of effort for that not to be the case. So a lot of times, if other people are around law students, that's all you hear is just
right.
So for you, I feel like you've been able to find a little bit more of a balance. So I'd be curious to hear a little bit more about your involvement outside of law school and how you've been able to manage that.
Yeah, so I actually think I've not done as great of a job as I would have liked. I think that a lot of people will talk to you and say, hey, you need to be involved outside of law school, you need to be involved out of law school. And it's really easy to say, yes, absolutely. I do have a lot of hobbies, I think, that are outside of law school. I like to paint abstract things poorly. I like to thrift store and rock climb, and these are things that are activities that are done outside of law school that are self-care, that are important for me. But as far as individuals outside of law school, I have one best friend who just happened to be in New York / happened to be my roommate. And so that's really my only connection outside of law school. But I've been doing a lot of thinking about that this the past couple of weeks, because I had a friend visit town, and then I hung out with her cousins who are, you know, in like the media industry, so not at all law school related. I ended up signing up for this like board game tournament that was like 4 weeks long, and I interacted with individuals there who were not law students, and that was a lot of fun. It was weird. I was like, I don't know what to talk about without talking about law school, but it was a really good muscle to exercise and to remember how important it was. And I was like it was so fun not talking about how stressed I am about studying or exams, which I don't get that stressed, honestly. Like I'm not, I have a paper due at 5 p.m. tomorrow, and I have 3 pages done out of 15. I'm not stressed about it. It's fine. It'll get done. So I don't carry stress with me. I think I do a really good job of that. But it was really fun to like hear different perspectives and to realize that I need to work harder at talking to more non-law people. So this summer I'm going to join a kickball team.
That's so fun.
People. Yeah.
So the reason why you don't necessarily consider your hobbies like non-law is because you're not doing it with non-law people.
I think that's really what. Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
So that's how you categorize it.
Because I think like otherwise. Because, you know, I can sit there and be painting and be like, okay, so torts, like, what am I going to, right? Like, I'm still thinking about the law because that's all that my life revolves around.
Right.
And so, so getting people outside the law is really important.
Just to go back for a second to, are you on Law Review? No.
No. I am way too happy to be on Law Review.
Why did you choose Columbia?
So I was actually like really hesitant to choose Columbia at first because I had spent 2 years in Seoul, Korea, which was an amazing experience.
Yeah.
But it was very gray. It was like a gray city. It was a city I wasn't super... It was just so gray. And...
Korea?
Yeah. And so I didn't realize that Columbia would offer a visiting stipend. Like they paid for my plane ticket actually, and then I ended up staying with somebody, and that was free, so that was nice. But I didn't realize that they had that because I didn't review the admission application or the admission materials very closely. So I was like going through it, about to throw it away. I'm not sentimental at all, so I was like, paperwork, like throw it. And so I was like, I should look through this and see if there's anything helpful. And I was like, you will pay for your plane ticket. And I was like, what? I'm totally going. So it was like a week later, the last admitted students opportunity. And I had been admitted for like, I don't know, like 2 or 3 admitted students events that I had just let pass by because I didn't realize they would pay for me or help me attend. And it was just not financially feasible for me to come on my own.
Right.
And so, visiting and finding, it was like late April and New York was in bloom, like there was all the flowers and the green, and it was like still chilly, but it was like beautiful weather, and like all of the brownstones, it was like so beautiful. And Columbia, I loved Columbia's campus. Like I come from a really big campus. I lived at home during undergrad, and so I really wanted that community that I didn't think like NYU offered. I was debating between Columbia and Michigan, actually.
That's so funny. Sam was also.
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Were they offering you a scholarship money?
So once you take into account the cost of... So Columbia gave me a larger scholarship, but once you take into account the cost of living, it ended up being almost... it would have been the same cost to me. But I actually came to New York, just fell in love with it, which is ironic because anyone who knows me knows that I do not like New York. But at the time I thought it was home, and I actually had booked a leg to Michigan so I could visit there, and I just skipped it. I did not.
Wow,
I did
really?
not go to Michigan.
What made you consider Michigan? What was it about Michigan that stood out?
That's where my best friend goes.
Okay.
And he talked only positive things. And I think that it was something where I wanted it to be in a liberal space, because I grew up in, my undergrad were both a very conservative space, and I'm fairly liberal, and I wanted to experience what that would look like, and I wanted it to actually, that was really it. I just wanted it to be in a liberal space, and the other places that I was looking at like didn't really seem to fit the mold. Yeah.
Bridget asked, if you don't want to work at Big Law, do you still have to do on-campus interviews in the same way? So people who don't want to do Big Law tend to do public interest, and that you don't do the on-campus interviews. A lot of it, I think, is people finding their own opportunities, if I'm not mistaken. It's a little bit less of a clear path, I think.
Yeah, so there are different programs that are very similar to on-campus interviews, like the PILF Fair.
That's true, yeah.
And then there are a lot of job postings on our, I forget what it's called, but there's some kind of like simplicity, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I think the rest of it's pretty informal, just applying to different things as you find them.
But yeah, the PILF Fair is probably the closest thing to OCI, where you get a chance to submit your resume and your information, and you're set up with interviews, so that way you can kind of have an option to do that if you'd like. I guess just kind of to start wrapping it up, what has been your favorite course or favorite thing that you've been involved with at Columbia? And then I'll ask you the other one.
Okay. I think probably my favorite course has been negotiations.
Okay, you take that now?
Yes, I'm taking that right now. There are a lot of courses. I think each course brings something different to the table.
Yeah.
I think negotiations has been the most impactful as it relates to like everyday life. I have been working, taking the different skill sets learned in negotiation and applying them to my real life, like applying them to my friendships.
Wow.
No, it sounds weird. Like I'm not negotiating with my friendships, but like learning.
Right.
Like one of the things that was like a session was like looping. So seeing what your interests are and being like, okay, like I understand them to be this.
Yeah.
And understanding that when I loop like what I've heard back to you, that doesn't necessarily mean that I agree with it. I'm just repeating what you've stated.
Yeah.
Yeah, and anyway, so like every single week I'm always like, whoa, this is so cool. I get so excited, like I really, really love it. And I think that it's something where like for a class like that, you really need to invest in it.
Yeah.
Like I think that I have some classmates who are like, negotiations, like, who don't really play along with the simulated scenarios.
Yeah.
But I think that they're really helpful and really important, and I've learned a lot of things about myself. For example, in the middle of a negotiation or a conversation, sometimes I just need to sit and think for 5 minutes. Like, I'm not quick on my feet. I'd be like, oh, okay, great, thank you so much for your counteroffer. Please give me 5 minutes while I think about this number, right? Like, and I like recorded my final negotiation, and I'm like looking at myself, and I'm just like, 5 minutes, just 5 minutes of me sitting there. But that's something that like it really like from the beginning I've struggled with at the beginning of the semester, and so I would.
Yeah, you found a way.
Weird.
But I think that's what I was referring to earlier in terms of like you find a way that works for you, and I feel like a lot of people don't even think about the fact that you could do it a different way that might work better for you.
Yeah, and I think like negotiations does a good job of like trying to encourage you to find your way and to think outside the box and add value.
Who's the professor?
I had Professor Carol Liebman. She was incredible, but she has retired from teaching.
Oh, that's so sad.
But there are so many amazing professors I know.
Okay, and then the second question is, what has been your greatest like takeaway or growing experience, or way that you've grown these past 2 years at Columbia, or being in grad school?
I think self-confidence. Like I've always been a confident person.
Yeah.
So do not get me wrong there. But I think there's something different about Columbia. Like there's always a fine line between being cocky and arrogant and being confident. And I think as a woman, like it's a little bit, there are so many double binds women can get into while walking that line. But it's something where, and I know that this is like a status thing that isn't, I have some struggle with, but like whenever I go somewhere and people are like, oh, what do you do? And I'll be like, oh, I'm a law student, right? And they'll be like, oh, where do you go? And then I'm like, I almost like hesitate to say
Mm-hmm.
it because I like don't want to be pretentious, but like whenever I do, because I'm just going to answer their question, I say Columbia Law School, and like their face changes and their attitudes toward me change in this like really visible and discernible way. And I think the inverse of that is microaggressions, right?
You've
and
experienced that, you think?
microaggressions.
Yeah.
At the beginning of law school, so this is a very not. I don't want to. Anyways,
Okay.
So, right. Well, whenever I would be like, oh yeah, like I'm from Texas at the beginning of law school, people would make the opposite face.
Yeah.
They'd be like, oh. Again, Columbia is one of the most liberal places, and I think that unfortunately Texas doesn't always have the greatest reputation on some of
Right.
certain issues. You know, and that was kind of like frustrating, but it was fairly insignificant in my life.
Yeah.
But the opposite of it, having, you know, being able to say I go to Columbia Law School and people to respect me instantly and to treat me differently, and learning how to own that and learning how to utilize that to make a difference, I think has been really cool.
Okay. It's 9:57. I think we should wrap up. But thank you so much, Audrianne. That was so cool. I really appreciate you sharing all of this knowledge and the
Thanks for having
insight
me.
of your path so far, especially during finals. As I mentioned, right now is finals, and she decided she was willing to do this. So thank you so much.